Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coach.Better from Maduro Learning. My name is Clint Hamada.
And my name is Kim Capino, and we'll be your hosts for today's episode. This week, we're chatting with Philip Williams, head librarian at NIST International School in Bangkok, Thailand. As a librarian at NIST, Philip is actually part of the coaching team. So this episode in particular highlights the overlaps of how a modern librarian fits so well into the culture of coaching at a school. Philip shares lots of great examples of how, even in schools without a coaching team, a librarian can be a stepping stone into building that coaching culture, with your librarian as your information literacy coach.
If you enjoy any part of this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help us to know what you want to hear more about. Also, subscribe to the channel to see all of our coaching videos and click on the notifications bell so you know as soon as each video is posted.
And please make sure to watch all the way to the end. We've got two great opportunities for your professional learning that we think you'll love. Let's get started. Philip, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your educational career, please?
Okay. My name is Philip Williams. I'm the head librarian at NIST International School currently. Before that, I was the librarian at across the continuum in Vientiane in Laos, and then before that I was in Mexico City at ASF. So and before that I was a physiotherapist, so I had a career change. I saw the light and thought librarianship and education was my new vocation, so I did a master's in library and information management and made the jump over.
Cool. And you're very fortunate to be working, like you mentioned, at NIST, because they really do have a strong culture of coaching, particularly at NIST and especially, I would say, in the elementary school. And I know you work really closely with those coaches at NIST. So we have a bunch of questions we want to ask you about your experience as a librarian, from your perspective as a librarian, about what it's like to be working with coaches. And I'm going to start with the question, what do you think coaches do? Like, what is their role? What do they do in a school?
I actually find that a difficult question to answer because it is many and varied and wide. And so each coach has a different kind of background, a different skill set, and a different focus. So each person works, that sort of drives us all to work a little bit differently in the way that we would see and sort of manage this coaching role. And added to that, each person that comes, that we have interaction with in that coaching role, whether it be sort of staff or students, they all come with a different background, a different history, different experiences, different expectations. So I think probably the first thing that coaches do is listen and pay attention, kind of tune into where the person or the people or the class that we are working with, where they are. And then try to respond in kind. So I think that's probably, that's the very start of what coaches do. And then the way that we respond to that is, and how that unfolds in practice can be sort of many and diverse kinds of things. So, and then I guess, so that's kind of broad now. If I make it a little bit more focused, it's very much a collaborative role, and a collegial role where you work alongside staff and students, and in responding to that need or that need that they bring along, and respond to that in kind, sort of based on what we hear. So as a coach from a library perspective, I then bring the expertise and the background and the resources and the kinds of things that I bring, hopefully are things that the teachers and the students feel is valuable in their practice and the things that they're doing. And it's something that then, for them, it's just like an augment and a support for what they're doing.
I think that idea that, there is no one roadmap for coaching or for coaches based on the entry point of the coach itself, or themselves, or the teacher or the student that they're working, and then sort of the exit point after you've had that interaction, and then where they go from there, is one of the challenges of being a coach and working with the coach. But I also think it's also one of the what are the highlights, because it can truly be a really personalized or a really focused interaction on me as the teacher or as the student, because that coach is listening to my needs and responding to my needs, and not just working off of a script or working off of a checklist that I must do this, this, and this, right? They're really trying to listen to what it is that I'm struggling with, or that I have questions about, or that I have challenges, or where I want to go. And then starting from there rather than from where they think I should be.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. And you brought up a really good point too. You're talking about the exit point, being focused on the exit point. So, the coach is not there to build in a dependency within a teaching or collegial relationship. You have an interaction, you provide and work alongside, but then it's kind of focused, it's kind of task specific. So you're kind of looking at really trying to achieve something practical, but then something that you can close off at some point as well to move on to either a next step. So it's not just like an endless kind of ongoing thing with no real kind of aim to it. It is important to have a focus and an objective around learning, and then have a point that you kind of you can wrap that up and then move onto something different. Or so I think that's important to have that kind of that mindset. You go in, meet the need, or provide that support where you can, and then a point that you move on as well.
The other thing I noticed when you were talking before is how, I know this is something that is really important at NIST, is that the coaching experience is very invitational. It comes from the teacher's query, question, challenge, struggle, whatever it might be, and then they come to the coach with that issue, and the coach then supports them. So I think you really highlighted the need of the coaches to be able to start with where the person who's approaching them is coming from, and then adjust and adapt based on that.
Yes, and I think for libraries, there's often schools will have libraries kind of on a fairly fixed schedule and kind of locked into a way of operating and set programs, where at NIST it is very invitational and open. In that, and then it becomes a much more flexible kind of arrangement. So then you're more able to respond to a need that comes. So rather than just doing a program across a year level and trying to hit all the students and then to say, okay, we've done that, I'm ready to move on, we are responding very much based on the need and where it connects into the learning flow of the students at that time. And then hopefully the aim is that's a much more sustained kind of learning. It's a much more practical and implemented kind of learning. And to do that, as a librarian, I need to have a flexible schedule, so that if a class just arrives, or a small group of students, or a teacher arrives with very little notice, I'm still able to respond and move forward without having to book that up, a month ahead of time, So I think that's really important to have that flexibility.
So it sounds like in your work as a librarian, you also consider yourself a bit of a coach, in that sense of you being responsive and flexible and able to support teachers and students wherever they're at. But as a librarian, how do you actually work with the coaches? Like, what do you do in collaboration with the literacy, the math, the tech coaches? How do you work together with them? What kind of partnership do you have with them? Like, how does that relationship work for you in your perspective as a librarian?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's kind of formal and informal ways that works, and it depends on the context. So an ideal example would be, say, a year 5 are doing like a flattened schedule, looking at writing, and later they were going to be focusing on a media week, and like a project-based learning kind of thing. And in that context, the coaches are all kind of have some kind of connection. And so then we negotiate and kind of work how we're going to support that week, because it's a full-on week for the teachers. And so between us, we're able to, with the literacy coach, obviously with the writing unit and the media, there's perspective that coach can bring. And then and we each bring that kind of skill set to bear. And so in the formal context, that's in the planning meetings with the team. We also, as coaches, meet on a formal basis just to kind of touch base about sort of general and bigger ideas around what's happening at the school. And then on an informal basis as well. I mean, that's probably the most critical thing, is that that as coaches, we're as mobile as possible around the school and able just to have those, you know, the water cooler kind of conversations that just that keep the wheels turning, the plate spinning, and, you know, we can keep moving forward as a team. So yeah, there's the informal and the formal kind of elements to that. From a librarian perspective, I think that involves me also working beyond the library walls. So just really seeing that the library is not something that everyone has to come into to connect with. It is something that they can connect with in any space that they're at, which also means me physically being there at times, but then of course that they have the digital tools, the electronic tools, as well as obviously the books in their spaces, that they are actually then connecting with the library from that environment. So that involves me then just having to be mobile in and out of the spaces. It's a tricky balance to achieve in a busy school like NIST.
I think it's interesting to think of the librarian as almost like the original coach. It's like the information literacy coach, you know, even back in that kind of traditional idea of, in the 1950s, you know, your quiet libraries with your Dewey card catalogs. That librarian was still your coach as you were trying to find the information that you needed. It was very personalized. It was just in time. Yes, sometimes there was a delivery of library lessons or information literacy lessons, but really it was about supporting those individuals in their research and in finding their own interests. I really like that kind of parallel of thinking about that, and then thinking about how you fit also within the other coaches at your schools. You're talking about, you know, I know in a PYP school, the librarians are often very invested in the planning process, you know, that may be sitting down with the grade level teams and sitting down with the technology coaches or with the literacy coaches as well. And I think that kind of formal collaboration is super rich and super rewarding for those teachers and for the coaches as well, to get your perspective and think about how they can bring that into their own practice. As a tech coach or working with the tech coaches, how does the perspective of the literacy or of the information literacy experts and coaches help?
Yeah, exactly. There was just a little bit of a glitch there. We're back. No, I totally agree. I think, is it Kath Murdoch that talks about the kind of the split screen in the things that we're doing? And it's, you know, on the one side, we are talking about, you know, what might be traditionally considered library skills, but actually what, you know, so an example is today we're just introducing a new facet to a library catalogue, which the students can access online, and there's various features that we can use within that for the students, you know, to explore. But then, I mean, but then that lesson or that idea that we're working with them and the staff at the same time is not just that. It's not that important to learn that library catalogue. It's these ideas of curation and reflection and communication are the big ideas that they can transfer beyond that tool to other tools, beyond that tool to this place to other places. And that's kind of really, it's in that area, in that split screen, in those bigger ideas that and those transferable skills and knowledge that where we really connect with across the coaches. So because we're talking the same kind of language, we're talking communication, we're talking student agency. So it's kind of like, so I really like that split screen concept.
So one great thing about NIST is that you guys all work together so well as a team. And as you mentioned, you have those formal relationships with the coaches where as a coaching team, you are part of that team. Not every school would have the librarian as part of that team. So that's a very forward-thinking model and structure that's going on at NIST, which is awesome. Thinking about the ways that you guys work together, what are some good opportunities for coaches to work with you, either as part of that formal team or informally? How can coaches support you as a librarian, and maybe not just thinking exclusively about your work at NIST because there is such a great structure already, but thinking about coaches who might be interested in knowing more, like how can I better support my librarian? We don't have this great formal structure at my school. What is it that I can do to collaborate with my librarian in my setting?
I think that one just kind of practical way and a very concrete way is to think of the libraries. You know, when we think about the library at NIST, but any library, we gather data on the number of just the classes that come through, the number of parents and community members, teachers that come through our doors. And so that means for us at NIST, on average, we have at least 400 people coming through, kids and everyone coming through in a day. That offers a huge opportunity for coaches to have an impact on our community. So for us as a library, we are trying to impact the learning of every student in our community, impact the teaching and learning that happens across the whole school. Then connecting with the coaches, the physical space of the library is a great place to reach out to the community and be visible and connect on informal and formal ways with what's going on with the learning and with that community. So, for example, like a fairly straightforward example is, say, the coaches will often run parent sessions. So whether that's around, digital citizenship, or whether it's around mathematics or literacy, any of those kinds of things. And almost, invariably, they'll be offering, their theories, their ideas come from somewhere. They come from resources, either articles or books. We then make sure we have those books in our collection. If they're talking to a book or talking to a resource, we have to have it so that our community can access it. But if it's an article, then we print them up and just have them on the table, so that when people come in, if families either didn't get to the session or maybe they went to the session, there's a great follow-up to have that material that they somewhere in a public space in the school that they can just come along and collect it. So it's that's a fairly simple but fairly concrete way of the library being sort of integrated, entwined with, the things that are happening throughout. And I think when you think too, like the coaches work across the continuum, sort of vertically, sort of from the lower grades to upper grades, but then also kind of horizontally across teams and across subject areas. There's great opportunity for us to connect around shared pedagogy. So there's a huge amount of sort of overlap between those kind of ideas. So underpinning much of what we're doing is about building student agency. And so what does that look like for when we're thinking about mathematics? When we're thinking about literacy? So then in the practices that how do we actually set up our physical space? How do our library staff interact with the people that come into our door? We can be sure that when we know the messages that are being sent throughout with all the coaches, we are then reinforcing that in the library. So what does agency look like for us in our space? This is what it looks like. This looks like choice. This looks like enabling, and this looks like being careful about the language and the messages that we send with the way that we set up our environment. So, and you mentioned the invitational aspect. That is a very big, that's a driver to how the coaches work. So when you come into the library, it is set up in an invitational way. So it's set up with, we call it design for discovery, so that when someone comes into the space, they're likely to encounter something that is surprising or they might not have come across before. And so we're really designing to try to maximize that. And that really then reinforces that all the way through the school to the classroom and with what the coaches are doing throughout.
I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning of that and how you're saying that the library's goal is a great space for those coaches to hang out in. I think many schools have the concept that the library is the central hub of the school, or they would like it to be that central hub. And you're right, you do get huge amounts of traffic, whether it's teachers or students or parents coming through there. So for any coach that is interested in upping their exposure, sitting in the library and work that you normally do at your desk on your computer, just kind of that administrative work of answering emails or whatever, being able to do that in that very public space. The amount of people who will drop by and just come and ask you a question, oh, since you're here and I see you, and just increasing that engagement. At our school, we've actually physically located our ed tech coaches, our STEAM facilitators in the library for that specific reason. And I think we're getting great rewards in just the amount of quick engagement that, instead of being hidden away in a corner office, they are right smack in the middle of all of the action that happens in that library.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that can help to ameliorate any sort of misunderstandings and misperceptions as well. Like if people feel like there's mixed messages or things are not quite going smoothly or not really understood, it's just if you can increase those opportunities for those face-to-face interactions, you can very quickly, sort of deal with those and it does, stop any misunderstandings from snowballing. So yeah, I think it's very important, and for the librarian, for me as well, the cost is, all of these things have a cost, and the cost is a lot of our administration gets interrupted, our library administration, all the kinds of things that we need to do, and of course they are very important, but it's kind of like which is going to take precedence. And of course, we still have to have those times where we are just in a quiet office, just getting some of those things done. But thinking about the time allocation. So if collaboration is important to us, if we believe in this coaching model, if we believe in being accessible and responsive, it's hard to do that if we're just kind of locked away in an office all the time. So being out into that space and being interruptible and if people feel comfortable to interrupt, if I'm working on a computer or working on something that I'm concentrating in, but kids and teachers and parents will interrupt you in that, then I feel like that's an indicator that I'm getting this right, that people feel comfortable to kind of interrupt me in that zone if they see that I'm accessible. So it's not an easy balance because, of course, we've all got, it's an endless job. There's always a million things that we need to pay attention to. There's always those big tasks that we're just not quite getting finished. But in the end, like in the day-to-day, those things can always wait. Sure. And it's those sort of personal interactions that really have the strongest impact.
You said in your introduction that you've worked at a wide variety of schools, like across many, many continents. As Kim keeps alluding to, NIST has a very, very strong culture of coaching and great coaching support. I would imagine that not every school that you have worked at has been in a similar situation. Looking back, maybe in some of those situations where you didn't have that coaching support, what did you do when you didn't have that opportunity to work with the coach, either because they weren't actually part of your staff or maybe they weren't available, or, how do you survive without a coach?
Yeah. I think it's as a librarian, but I think for other coaches as well, it's a matter of trying to connect within your community as broadly and vertically as far as possible. So it is important to build relationships with our administration at multiple kind of levels. So a finance and a business department understand and have faith in what we're doing. They can see that the things that we're doing are significant or contributing to the learning of the school. And then up through to senior management, and then all the way throughout to that 3-year-old, 4-year-old student, being able to move through all of those sort of different aspects of the school and build kind of relationships is critical, because as people, when I'm thinking about, thinking of an example at a previous school where we did do a significant renovation. It was, it took 3 years to kind of build toward that, but that took a lot of relationship building. It took a lot of, when you're spending that kind of money, you're trying to get that kind of support. People need to have complete faith that it's it's going to be significant to the school. It's going to make a difference. And once people start to capture the vision, then it's usually not a problem. But that just takes a lot of work and a lot of connecting, and it doesn't always work. That's definitely true. There are just definitely situations where you try from multiple angles, and it can be just frustrating. And that's just, that's the reality of any job, I think, is that. But I think that the key part is building those kind of connections and the collegial relationships and professional relationships through all those different levels.
Because you have worked in so many different environments, those where there has been maybe not so much coaching, and then now in this school where there really is a strong coaching culture, in your perspective as a librarian, what are the essential elements for coaching success in a school? What does the school need to build a culture of coaching?
Yeah, that's a deep and many and varied and complex question, but I think there are some key traits that I see that are effective, and I don't want to put them in an order of hierarchy.
Okay.
So let's not think about these in hierarchical, but these are kind of important things that come to mind. And one of those is to build that kind of culture is that as coaches, we need to be responsive to the needs and to where the students and the teachers are. And so I think that's being responsive is important. It's also important for the coaches and for the librarian, obviously, to have a sort of deep knowledge of our own skill set. What are we bringing into that environment that we feel is something that is unique, that can inject ideas, and whether it's ideas or resources that really support the kind of the practices and that we're looking for, like inquiry. And so I think being aware of your own skill set and fostering and learning and doing lots of reading, that just takes a lot of work to build that. I think a cohesive pedagogical kind of integrity, I think, is important as well. So having a shared philosophy of learning, and within that community, if you have those shared understandings, then those conversations are very rewarding and very smooth, and you can really work in very productive ways. So having that shared pedagogical kind of integrity, I think, is critical. I think being student focused is number one. So, and that's kind of an easy thing to say. In practice, not so straightforward, because you will sit in a room with, every staff member and you say, kids are our number one focus here and their learning's number one. Everyone agrees. But it comes back to some of those things I was saying earlier. So then how is that reflected in the way that we manage our time? How is it reflected in the way that we open our doors? How is it reflected in the furnishings that we have? How is that reflected in the way that we set up our schedules? How is it reflected in the language that we use when we meet with students? So it's making sure that student focus is a key driver to our decisions, and then the other important decisions that we make come underneath that. So I think that having that shared student-centered approach is critical, but then you have to continue to kind of unpack what that really means and how are we demonstrating that in our community at every level. And maybe the last one is kind of, it's in the minutiae, it's in the fine details, in those daily interactions, or it's in the so I want to try and unpack what that means in the library. I think, we have these lofty ideas about what we're trying to achieve with education, but if that student just fell over and bumped their knee and they're upset, that is the critical thing in that moment. If there is a disagreement between students, it's not wasted time to be involved in a coaching moment around that. Very important. So for that one child, it means everything in that moment. So paying attention to those small moments, I think, has very big kind of impacts on the effectiveness as coaches within a community, particularly since we are known by the whole community. We're seen by the whole community. We're visible to the whole community. So if we get that right, then we can have a huge impact. I think it can be very powerful.
I think that idea of the small moments is something that kind of resonates with the idea of, as a coach and really as an educator, being empathetic to your audience and understanding where they are and where they're coming from. And I think encapsulating that in that concept of, what are those small moments, and really paying attention to those small moments really does do a service to that idea. I want to go back to something that you said earlier, or something that you're talking about earlier. You're talking about being an inquiry school. And I know that, again, I said it before, that NIST is a PYP school. Do you think that in terms of a coaching culture, that inquiry mindset of a school, if that is widespread in a school, does that have any effect on kind of how teachers maybe receive or perceive coaching and coaches? Or I don't know. I was just thinking about that when you're saying that. Like, maybe part of this is having that inquiry. How do I get better? That self-inquiry. I'm wondering if in your experience you've seen any correlation, or you can maybe think of any correlation, or maybe I'm just making that up. I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it does, for sure. And I'm thinking of two examples, one for the students and one for the teachers. So one is today, like a year one class came in. We didn't really have any time to plan or prep, but they had a question that needed to be investigated. And the teacher and the students felt entirely comfortable coming into the library, putting me on the spot, and also challenging some of the books that we had. We found a book last week that had a mistake in it, and it was about, a bit of a tangent here, but they found that a book said that spiders have
this story.
Oily feet, yeah, so they don't stick onto a spider web. And they said, Mr. Phillip, that's wrong. We did some investigation with our teacher, and that's wrong. And then they stomp it. It's like, right. So now, what do we do with this book? That's So the inquiry mindset is the one of the teacher that fosters that. Also, the students that feel comfortable to challenge the authority of a book, challenge the information in a book, and then expect that they can then continue to follow that up. So then my response is not one to kind of stamp that down, obviously. It's one to kind of go, what a great noticing that you've done. What do we do with this? And so we went back and we had a look at when the book was printed. We tried to find other books. We've now put more books on order to try and refresh that part of our collection. they've continued, they'll come back to me again today with more. So it's just kind of has this kind of knock-on effect. But the result is, I mean, it's inquiry, it's the kids following an interest, following an idea, and we are helping to support that thread. So with the really little ones, of course, it's hard for them to maintain that thread. And so our job is to help foster and maintain that thread so that we can keep on going deeper with those kind of inquiries. So that has caused me many laughs over the last week as they've been sort of digging into that. It was a great example. The other one then from another perspective is I'm thinking about the teachers. One of the questions that the teachers ask themselves at NIST is when they're coming into a new unit of inquiry or they're looking at a particular area or looking at particular questions, one of the questions is, what's changed in this area of knowledge since we last looked at it last year? So very much embedded in the planning is this mindset that teachers are inquirers and they inquire alongside the students. So things change. Our understanding of spiders and their feet is a changing thing. Spiders don't have oily feet. They have all these other strategies for not sticking to their own web. It's fascinating. I didn't know it. I learned it alongside. So the teachers ask themselves that question when they're planning. Professionally, there's a lot of professional reading materials in the school, and that kind of professional reading is fostered as well. And as a librarian, as a coach, my job is to grease that wheel. So if we don't have the books that people are talking about, then we get those books and make sure they're in our community to keep on feeding that kind of inquiry.
So listening to you, it's helped me just kind of solidify maybe my thought is like instructional coaches are really there to support those professional inquiries by teachers in terms of their own practice and in terms of their own subject or maybe even subjects that they're interested in. I think that's a great way of framing that. And I think for a lot of inquiry-based schools too, it kind of puts that position into light and into perspective of the learning culture that they want to have at their school totally. Like for all learners, not just the students, but also looking at your parents as learners and your teachers as learners and your administrators as learners, and your instructional coaches are there to help support those professional inquiries. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, it makes me think. Sorry, I was just going to say, and in that sense, it does come back to your question, Clint, that it may potentially be, I don't want to say easier, but a more smooth or successful fit for coaching to work in inquiry-based schools because we are all looking at all of the stakeholders in the community as learners with their own individual inquiry paths.
And it makes me wonder if you are an inquiry-based school and you're really trying to provide an inquiry-based learning environment, how successful can you be without learning coaches to support your teachers in that same journey?
Yeah, you think, we read the book Innovative Mindset and other materials. I mean, it's all talking about, like, if we really value learning, which obviously we do at schools, I mean, that's our currency. So why and how does our school as an organization demonstrate that it's a learning organization? How do we demonstrate that as individuals, but also as a group? And then you're right, that the coaches are then a natural fit in that, because then we're like, okay, we have people with special knowledge and skills and background that they're bringing in. And the thing that's unique to the coach's role is that they have that flexibility in their schedule to be able to be integrated as that learning kind of happens in the organization. So their role as facilitating a learning organization I think is very, very powerful.
So we've just spent a bit of time talking about, obviously, the positives of coaching and on that learning environment. In your experience and in your opinion, what are some areas perhaps in which coaches, or maybe coaching in general, isn't as successful. It fails. Like, what maybe is part of that failure, and what can we either as coaches or as teachers who work with coaches do about that?
I think, some of it comes down to your personal sensitivities. I think, like as coaches, we work across so many staff and so many students. It's just hard. You just can't get it right all the time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make people in your community unhappy at some stage. And that's just a reality of working with people. It's very difficult as a coach not to be overly sensitive and have, get caught up in my own sensitivities about that reality, because it's not about me in the end. I'm not the important one here. To kind of overcome those, it does just mean you have to kind of just, it's just hard work. You just have to work hard. You have to be visible, and you have to take an active role within your community. It's not just going to fall in your lap. So I think it does fall down when that hard work is not evident. So a great example is, a lot of people might not perceive you as working hard if you're stuck in your office, but you could actually be working super hard. You could be just nutting through some very big things and putting some very big things in place. But if the fruits of that is not visible, it's not connecting into the community in meaningful kind of ways, then it's hard to change that perception. People don't necessarily think you are working hard, even though you are. So that perception is important. So dealing with and addressing with our community's perceptions is very difficult, but it is really important, I think. And it does hold us accountable. So I'm thinking of a particular practice. There are many great things that I can be doing with our catalogue or with our administration. But then, are those having a significant impact on the flow of learning in our community? If not, if it's hard to justify and make that connection visible, then I have to be pretty certain that it's worthwhile to continue. If I can't justify it, then it's definitely something that you just need to let go. And that's difficult, but then that is then connected into those community perceptions as well. So if it is, then how do I make that visible, and how do I make that something that people can kind of hold on to? And it's not easy, because another challenge I think for coaches is that because we try to be so flexible, so open, so adaptive, so responsive, then people can feel like, so what do you do? Tell us what you do. Well, it kind of depends. And so you become caught up in this kind of endless cycle, and then, that can be frustrating. So it does, I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I think in addressing those perceptions, it's important to be as clear as possible in what the work that I'm doing as a coach is visible, and be as decisive as possible. So if someone does ask me a specific question, really, and there is a need, and it might be, I don't know, it could be anything, I need to be decisive for them and for myself in how I manage that, and not be so kind of open that they leave going, I have no idea what we just did or what we achieved, So, but it's just a tricky balance, because you don't want to be concrete with everything and just like lockstep with things. But then people need some kind of framework to pin their understandings on. So whether it is, for librarians, we often get asked to do a lesson on citation. And our thinking is that citation fits in a much bigger idea of information literacy, about how students interact and communicate their ideas and connect people to their ideas and where their ideas have come from. It's a very big kind of idea, but we're often still asked us to do like a single one-off lesson, and we go, we want to go kind of deeper then. So then we're caught then. Do we still just provide that one-off lesson that we know is just not really meeting that bigger idea and meeting that bigger learning need? And or do we press for those bigger ideas? And if we do press for those bigger ideas when the person that we're talking to, or the teacher we're talking to, that's just not meeting their need, then we are at risk of breaking that relationship. So again, I don't think there's any one answer, but sometimes just providing those concrete kind of things that, we know we want to go further than that, but we provide those concrete things. Hopefully that person, we've established that connection, and then we've got a bridge to continue to work deeper with those ideas around something like citation, or using the library catalogue is another one. I mean, the Dewey Decimal System at all, it's just like, we teach that for years, and we just have to be open to doing just those basic things that are meaningful to people. So I'm not sure if that's very clear. But,
no, that was great. You had a lot of really important points there.
Right.
And it's making me like the overlap and connection between the work of a librarian and the work of a coach is very clear in this whole conversation. Right. So one question that comes to mind for me as a librarian, what makes coaches valuable to you in a professional? We talked about ways that coaches can support you, but what do coaches do that is useful, helpful, beneficial for you as a librarian? So in particular, I'm thinking about tech coaches, but any kind of coach, what can they do that is invaluable to the work that you do as a librarian?
There's two things that come to mind immediately. There's connection, and then there's the overlap. So because they are so mobile also throughout the community, then they hear things, they see things that I haven't seen and that I can't see, because there's 800 kids, over 40 classrooms. I can't see all of those things, but they will hear something, and the literacy coach goes, I know Philip. I was just talking to Philip last week, so we've got a connection there between the coaches. I was just talking to Philip last week. He showed me this new series, the Weirdo series. I know you'll love that. But she's up in the classroom, so she'll then make that connection to me, email, message, whatever, and I can close that loop, and so I can take up that opportunity. So that's just kind of like you're kind of being these connectors throughout the community, because you're mobile, you're in these learning spaces, you're seeing needs, but because we then also know what each of the coaches offer, their strengths and the specialized knowledge, that we can then connect each other into, connect the people that we're connecting with into our wider coaching team. So that's an example, say with the literacy coach, but the other example is, say, the math coach is doing a parent presentation. Questions come up around what literature, what things do we have in our school that will support what you're talking about. It all sounds great, but what do we as parents do? And then a math coach can say, I was talking to Philip last week, he's ordered heaps of the books I've suggested. I know he has a lot of this material. Go and chat with Philip, or here's the library catalogue. We can look right now and see what's there in the catalogue right now. So those kind of connections, I think, are super powerful and really important, and hard to maintain because we are all busy, and we all have, we're all bouncing around doing the things that we need to do. But then when that works, it's very powerful in our community, I think.
I think that is a great way to look at the like partnership or relationship between coaching and librarian, that connection and closing that feedback loop, because you're right, it's such a busy school and people are always so mobile and involved in so many different things. Our last and final question, because I'm conscious of time for everybody, was there ever a period in your career when you didn't really think that coaching was valuable? And do you remember that shift between, well, maybe coaching is actually something that is worthwhile, from the, oh, I don't really care if I work with a coach or am part of the coaching team? Did you have an aha moment?
I think when I came to NIST, the NIST community, as well as the coaches, we've wrestled with this idea of what a coach is. That has been a big learning experience for me and valuable, because I haven't been in a coaching team before. So that in itself, I guess that's been quite an aha moment. That's been quite an insight. But on the other side of that, the idea of coaching and the coaching model and some of those concepts that connect into what a coach is a very natural fit. As Clint, you were saying earlier, it is something that is in the very DNA of what a library is there for. So that's not a stretch. It's just go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That fits very nicely. That's a great way to think about what we do and extend what we do. But when I think back through my career as well, when I was thinking of physiotherapist, in a clinical setting, whether you're working with families or young children, people in different need situations, often very high need situations, that was very much a coaching kind of role. You're working alongside people, picking up that need, working with them when they're at their most vulnerable. So people say to me, jumping from a physiotherapist to a library, what a big jump. It's totally different. Well, in many ways, not any different, because it's still around that kind of, that I guess those coaching kind of concepts, or coaching kind of ideas. And when it comes down to one-to-one personal interaction and supporting people at a point of need, then, I mean, those concepts just transcend any kind of professional setting. So, yeah, so I mean, there are two things. The coaching role has been something that has been an insight for me here at NIST, but then on the flip side, it is also something that is very natural to I think, good practice as well.
It comes back to that coaching is all about relationships, and your previous career was the same. So it does make sense that it's a kind of, as different as it may seem from the outside, that there is a lot of commonality in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Philip. There was so many really interesting highlights. I wish we actually had even more time to go a little deeper with some of them. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and all of your thoughts and perspectives as a librarian today.
All right, my pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Philip.
Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll know when we release a new video each week. At Eduro Learning, as you know, we want to help you coach better. To get you started, we've got a free digital download for you called 5 Strategies for Your Coaching Toolkit right in the description box below. And if you're looking for even more, we now offer private coaching sessions to help you work through any specific issue you might be having as a coach or even just as an educator. Do you have a problem you can't seem to solve? Get your introductory private coaching session for free with us. Learn more at edurolearning.com/private coaching. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.